A child was excited about his first day of kindergarten. His mother dropped him off. He ran in with his lunchbox and his backpack. At the end of the day, when mother went to pick him up, he was pretty dejected. And she said, well, did you learn something today? And he said, well, apparently not enough. She said, what do you mean? They want me to come back. Okay, I guess it went better the second time. Who knows? Well, teaching has changed over the years since I was in school. And I found this little ditty about school. Teaching math in the 1960s. A logger sells a truckload of lumber for $100. His cost of production is 4/5 of the price. What is his profit? Now, if you were educated in the 60s and you're kind of a math person, you already know the answer to that question. Teaching math in the 70s. The logger sells a truckload of lumber for $100. The cost of production is 4/5 of the price, $80. What is his profit? Again, teaching math in the 80s. A logger sells a truckload of lumber for $100. His cost of production is $80. Did he make a profit? Yes or no? Teaching math in the 90s. A logger sells a truckload of lumber for $100. His cost of production is $80 and his profit is $20. Your assignment, underline the number 20. And in our millennium, here's the last one. A logger cuts down a beautiful forest because he is selfish and inconsiderate and cares nothing for the habitat of animals or the preservation of our woodlands. He does this so he can make a profit of $20. What do you think of this way of making a living? And then there's an explanation for the teacher. Here's a topic for class participation after answering the question. How did the birds and squirrels feel as the logger cut down their homes? There are no wrong answers, and if you feel like crying, that's okay. I'm going to talk about children, schools, parents, and the government today. Part of this is because of our upcoming election. And as I've done in the previous 2 messages on government, 2 messages on economics, a message on immigration, I want to follow the same outline today. What does the Bible say about this topic? And then we're going to look at what's driving the current stage of what's going on in our country. And then we have options. And so we'll be looking at that also today. And my pledge to you is to try to be as even-handed as I can, although I will tell you up front, this has been the hardest one for me to do. A war is going on in our country, but it's not a war on a battlefield. It doesn't have anything to do with guns or bullets. It is a war of ideas that is being waged. And the combatants, generally speaking, as I see it, on one hand, you have sort of the secular philosophers and university professors, though not all, of course, and on that side, the combatants have a PhD, they have a paycheck, they have tenure, they have power, authority, they have age, they've probably published. The combatant on the other side is your 18-year-old who leaves home for the first time as a freshman. And maybe some kids a little bit older than that. Now, this battle is sort of a microcosm of 2 gigantic battles going on in the world. One has to do with a spiritual battle that's going on, and then it involves people, the second battle. So let's look at this. Ephesians 6:10 talks about the first one. Be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. This is the spiritual war, the unseen war that's going on. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. The second battle that's going, the second war that's going on is partly the spiritual war that's going on, but it also involves people. 2 Thessalonians 2:9 says, the coming of the lawless one, here's the first person mentioned, will be in accordance with how Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie. And this is where we have the idea of a war of ideas. Truth and lies from the Bible's point of view. And all the ways that wickedness deceives, which is another part of this amazing war, to those who are perishing. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. And so the truth and the lie is the battlefield upon which both God and Satan are waging war, and people are involved in this as well. For this reason, God sent them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. And here the idea is that we as human beings can get so far away from the truth that the only way back is to get to a place where it's now nonsensical. And maybe then we will wake up and see, what about common sense? Where did common sense go? So that's what God in his mercy to people sometimes helps us to get to that point that wakes us up. So that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness. Now, on one side of the idea war are things like Western depending on who you are. Western civilization, Christianity, Christendom, Judeo-Christian framework, the Bible, or truth. On one side of this gigantic war. The other side goes by different names. Humanism, secularism, postmodernism, to name a few. But the combatants are not just the freshmen off to college for the first time, but the battle has now moved into the high school, the junior highs, and now even elementary schools in some parts of our country. So we're going to look at three things. What does the Bible say about our role as parents and our responsibility to children? Does the government have a say in this? The second thing we'll look at is the idea of curriculum. And there are two parts that I'd like to do. What is the ideology driving sort of this new, although it's really not new, but this new ideology that's very different from what I grew up with and many of you grew up with, and some examples of curriculum that is now in different parts of the country. And the third thing we'll look at is state control. And I'd like to touch on three things: parental notification, the clash of educational values, and the question, who owns the kids? Which I cannot imagine would have been a question any of us would have ever asked even 5 or 10 years ago. But we'll finish with that. What does the Bible say about children and parents? Deuteronomy 6 is very clear about the answer to that question. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you. And what he means is right before this were the 10 commandments, Deuteronomy chapter 5. For you to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all these decrees and commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. In other words, no matter where you are with your children or what you're doing, these are teachable moments if we as parents can see them as this. Tie them, these commandments, as symbols on your hands, bind them on your foreheads, write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Now, you may think, well, wow, it's kind of like overkill here, isn't it? I mean, why does Moses go into such detail to say the parents are responsible? The parents have authority. It is the duty of parents to raise your children and teach them. Now, you may think, well, Seth, why are you going into such detail on this? Because in our current culture, this is now a viable question on the other side. which is just absolutely shocking to me. Let's look at curriculum. The ideology that's driving this curriculum, and in my opinion, there's a fundamental shift from education to indoctrination. I never would have believed this when I was a kid, or even when I was in college back in the early 70s. Indoctrination minds, not away from the Judeo-Christian ideology or truth or Western civilization as we've known it, or what our founders called natural law. All of these things now are seen as oppressive by the folks, the ideological drivers, which is secular philosophers and many, many university professors. Progressivism and nihilism are also some of the things that are mentioned. You may think, oh, Seth, you sound like you're doing, this is one of those conspiracy theorist guys. Well, I'm going to quote today so that you will know this is not just Seth coming up with some conspiracy theory. This is the first president of the World Health Organization. And I quote, "In order to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas." What basic psychological distortion can be found in every civilization of which we know anything? You might wonder, God, I wonder what psychological distortion he's going to come up with here. The only psychological force capable of producing these perversions is morality. I could have given you 100 opportunities to fill in the blank, and none of us would have come up with that word. Morality, the concept of right and wrong, the reinterpretation and eventual eradication of the concept of right and wrong are the belated objectives of nearly all of psychotherapy. Now, your next door neighbor's probably never heard that quote. And maybe some members of your extended family have never heard that quote. But what this man just put in words, what he spoke, is the ideological basis that is driving this war of ideas. And you've heard of some of these things. All truth is relative. The sexual differences between people are just socially constructed. There's nothing genetically or biologically or personally different. And Western civilization and biblical truth have to be done away with because they are the number one oppressors of the world in which we live. This is happening on the college campus, which sort of reminds me. There was a kid that got his first job after school at a grocery store, and he showed up on the day, and the manager welcomed him in and handed him a broom and a dustpan and said, "Your first duty today is to sweep the floor." And the young guy looked at him and said, sort of indignantly, "What do you mean? I'm a college graduate." To which the manager said, "Oh, I'm sorry. In that case, let me show you how this broom works." In my school years, back in the 60s and early 70s, there were certain things that we were taught. And if you're old enough, you were taught these things too. To think critically, to think logically, to write clearly, and to speak properly. Those things are now gone. And it does remind me of an eccentric philosophy professor. At the end of the term, there was final exam, and everybody was walking in. They were scared to death about philosophy exam, final exam, and studied it all night and stuff. When they get there, the professor walks up and he takes his chair and he puts it up on his desk. And he writes the following on the board, whiteboard. It says, based on what you've learned, prove that this chair does not exist. And he left the room. And everybody realized they have about 48 minutes to complete this one question. final exam question. And so, man, the papers are going and writing in ink, and people are turning pages, and they're trying to think of what they learned in the class and how can they apply it in these papers. Well, one of the students there finished his final exam in less than a minute. And he finished it with 2 words, and he got the highest grade in the class. When the professor looked at his answer book, all it said was, "What chair?" Learning to think critically. You can now get a degree in English without having to read Shakespeare in some universities. You can get a degree in music without having to listen to Beethoven or Brahms or Bach. Why? Because all 4 of those men have some fatal flaws about them. They are men. They are old. They are products of Western civilization, and we certainly can't have any of that. Postmodernism's unholy trinity, you've probably heard about this: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, when I was young, meant diversity of opinion. And you were trained in class, in school, to be able to have diversity of opinion and to be able to talk with people about their ongoing, about the differences, honest differences of opinion. Not anymore. That's a no-no in today's culture. Diversity now means diversity of race, ethnicity, and sexual identity. Equity, when I grew up, was the equal opportunity in order to live your life, to get an education, to move wherever you wanted to move, and to do your job. Today, equity means equality of outcome. And inclusion used to be that we love everybody, even with differences. Now it means identity-based quotas. And there are a few things in your handout that I included. All the rights of Judeo-Christian truths and American values are considered depending on how far down the rabbit trail you go or the rabbit hole you fall, are either secondary, inferior, or destructive. For example, freedom of speech is one of the core essences of what it means to be an American. And this is something that we have enjoyed, but not anymore. Because freedom of speech opens the door to diversity of opinion that some people are not just going to not like, but are going to see it as hate speech or destructive or oppressive. Rejection of the free market is another thing. In the 2 messages on economics, I dealt with this. You can go back and listen to this. Even though capitalism has lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty and provided food and all kinds of things that we enjoy wherever it is allowed to go. And then the third one is politics of identity. In our world that I grew up in, you were important as an individual. Your life mattered. Now, you may not know this, but it mattered because we're made in the image of God. There's something special about being a human being. Not anymore. No, your identity has to do with a group that you run with or that you identify with. And Karl Marx is probably the number one culprit here that has unleashed all of this. When he looked at the disparity of income and he saw the bourgeoisie, the greedy rich and the poor, and something needed to be done about this, and he unleashed his ideology, which still haunts us today. Let's look at some curriculum examples. In American history, this one's close to me because I was a history major. I've been studying American history since at least fourth grade that I remember. And I've been fascinated with it. It's a story of idealism and tragedy, but it's both of these, and our country trying to rise above the tragedies of our lives, of our country. Chicago Public Schools adopted an American history curriculum based on the 1619 Project. If you're not familiar with the 1619 Project, it was produced by the New York Times, which should alert you already. And the fundamental premise of this curriculum is that America was founded when the first slave ship landed at Jamestown. And from that moment on, we became a racist nation that has continued all the way down since then for 305 years, and that we will never really get rid of this stain. Now, when I think about this, I think about, as adults, it's one thing for adults to differ about this, and we can talk about this, and we can at least understand something of where the other person's coming from. But if you throw this at seventh graders who don't have this kind of life experience or understanding to process this, what do you think is going to happen in schools between people of color and people who are white? What do you think is going to happen with kids? Is this going to be more inclusive? Is this going to bring our country together? Or is it going to drive a wedge? I'll let you decide the answer to that question. A second area, I mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion. A third is the thought police are out in force in different places around the country. In Wellesley, Massachusetts, students were told, quote, "Be on the lookout for unconscious racial bias in your classmates." Now, a few of you are teachers. Can you imagine telling that to your class? And then an email went out to the students. "We need your help. Your school leaders will be working with you this year on how to be proactive about preventing bias incidents and how to report them should they occur." Isn't that just swell? And then gender and sexuality issues. In Colorado, kids are being taught that just because a boy looks like a boy does not necessarily mean he's a boy. And just because a girl looks like a girl doesn't necessarily mean that she is a girl. It's really up to how they feel about whether they are a boy or a girl. This series is called Platforms and Policies. And as one of you told me a few weeks ago, this is going to be challenging because for a long time, one of our presidential contenders had a hard time putting on a website what their platforms were or their policies. Thankfully, that is starting to seep out. The draft of the Democratic Party platform of this year, quote, "Pledges to keep fighting book bans that censor LGBTQI plus content." That's how they see this. What they mean is parents' attempts to place graphic novels containing graphic depictions of sodomy in an age-protected part of the library. Now, you may be on one side or the other. That's up to you. In a country like ours, you get to decide. Countless school board videos that I have seen, probably you've seen, with a parent reading to the school board a book from the kids' library that has such vulgar and specific sexual language and actions to do that in some school boards, the mic was turned off. In somebody on the school board said, "We can't have you reading that. That's not acceptable standards here," which I find is so remarkable. And you get to decide on that. The Florida law that happened a year or two ago, Governor DeSantis, was falsely called over and over and over again the "Don't Say Gay" law. This is one of the things that's so infuriating about politics, is that people can be so deceptive and sound so noble at the same time. Let me read you some excerpts from the law that passed the Florida legislature. Quote, "Schools may not discourage or prohibit parental notification or involvement in critical decisions regarding a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being." Talk more about this in a minute. Parental notification. Another quote, "Parents cannot be blocked from educational and health records created, maintained, or used in the school." Quote, "Classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3. Oh, and the wolves came out with this one. "Or in a manner that is not age appropriate. Now, some of you have little children right now. I remember having little children, three going through school. I now have 3 little grandkids, 4, 4, and 2. And one of the things that is so wonderful about early childhood is a sense of innocence. How long does that last? It lasts until the reality of the world finally comes crashing into their little lives. And at what point is a child's ability to process the difficulties of this world in a way that makes sense to them? That's an honest question. When White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was the White House Press Secretary, in response to the Florida laws, this is what she said, quote, maybe the bill's sponsors want to hurt children. If you look up the word disingenuous in the dictionary, I think you'll see her picture there. Actually, politicians are masters of being disingenuous. Continuing to quote, why are Florida leaders deciding they want to discriminate against kids who are LGBTQI community? Is it meanness? Oh, that's it. We just want to be mean. Is it wanting to make kids a more difficult time in school? Now, when you put these things together, I think about, well, what is the result of some of these examples? And there are countless examples out there. What are the results of this? And I have 3 summaries. The first is their past is terrible and they have no future. That's one. A second one is if they are white, they are racist. And if they are people of color, they are a victim, whether they've experienced victimhood or not, or whether a white person has actually been racist or not. Guilty of both. And the third one is you should question your sexual identity at a very early age. One of the things that is just mind-boggling to me as a pastor is that we live in an age of unprecedented psychological problems with kids. And I want to say, duh! Duh! You feed young kids this kind of material at a young age, what do you expect to get? It's hard enough for us as adults just listening to this to process this. And now we'll look at the last part, state control. California ranked in the bottom half of the United States, of the 50 states in education. And here are a few statistics. 30% of 8th graders, only 30% of it, were proficient in reading. 30%. 23% were proficient in math. 23% were proficient in civics, how our government works. Who owns the American children? Again, a question that I never thought I would ever have to answer. In Chino, the school district there has bravely stepped up against the forces of power in our state regarding this. Sonia Shaw is the president of the Chino School Board and instituted a policy of parental notification. You think, well, hasn't it always been that way? The state of California struck back with Assembly Bill AB 1950. 1950. AB 1950 law prohibits educators from informing parents about their own child for a change of pronouns, locker rooms, restrooms, unless the minor child approves it. Now again, you and I vote for politicians and politicians enact law. And here's an example of you sort of get what you vote for as a collective. All the states have to face the same kind of thing. Thankfully, at least we have a voice. If a child comes up to a parent and wants to go to the opposite bathroom or the opposite locker room or wants different pronouns or wants gender surgery, it's required of the teacher to ask the child, is it okay if I share this with your parents? And if the child says no, end of story. End of story. For the teacher to do this would be to break California law. Thankfully, the Liberty Justice Center is taking legal action against this. It's called the Chino Valley Unified School District versus Newsom, to restore transparency between parents and teachers. And if you follow this on a national level, I remember seeing a number of different places where our Attorney General tried to deny that FBI agents in some parts of the country were investigating to see if parents who spoke up at school board meetings could have been or might be domestic terrorists. Let that one sink in. And then the clash of national values. In the Moreno Middle School in San Francisco, they have no disciplinary actions and no ability to suspend unruly students. Gee, I wonder what's happened there. It's a school that's descended into chaos. A Christian PE teacher, Jessica Tapia, was fired from teaching. What crime did she commit? She shared her faith, not at school, and not on a public website related to the school, on her own time, on an Instagram account that was hers and not the school's, and she was fired over that. She was later granted a settlement agreement of $360,000, which hopefully will slow down this barrage moving in this direction. We have terms that we used to value as when we were young. And you still value them out in the work world today. And if you have a family, you still value these terms today. And you are trying to instill these values in your children. I am trying to instill these values in my grandchildren as well. Things like responsibility, standards, meritocracy, consequences, accountability. Those things are now in some parts of our country considered racist. And imagine having that in your profile going in to try to begin a career with those metrics. Imagine hiring somebody with those metrics. I remember growing up, we used to call about learning the 3 R's. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Although apparently, if you think about that, reading, writing, and arithmetic, I guess we weren't very good at spelling, you know. we still call them the 3 R's. Responsibility, hard work, rational thought were all important there. In the Alameda School District, students were required to produce a slideshow on the following things in class: white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, and cisnormativity as part of their ethnic studies curriculum, which will be required in California in the year 2029, school year 2029-2030. Isn't that swell? In Michigan, the Department of Education, on their website a few years ago, had detailed instructions for how teachers should open the question with students of their sexual orientation. And some detailed instructions on how to keep this activity from their parents. Isn't that sweet? You may have heard about the ongoing thing in Temecula, and I'll finish with this story here. The Temecula folks decided that this kind of nonsense they were done with. And when there was a school board election, they ousted the old majority and voted in a new majority. And the things that they went for were parental notification and parental ability regarding to choose curriculum. What they ended up asking for was a war from our state government. A court ruled in their favor about parental notification, quote, "The district's purpose in involving parents in the decision-making process and restoring trust is furthered by mandatory parental notification. But after that, AB 1955, which prohibiting requiring school employees to disclose information, that came down the process. In May of last year, 2023, the folks in the Temecula School District had a problem, a big problem. They wanted to reject the state-mandated textbooks, which included sexuality preferences to younger grades and supplemental material that I would not read publicly here in this setting. That decision was denounced by the state, with lawmakers led by our Governor Newsom forming new laws and shoring up violations to stop the Temecula School District decision. Their classes were supposed to start on August 14th, and they still had no textbooks. They were pressured to take another vote July 18th and voted 3-2 to reject the textbooks, which was a good decision. In response to their saying that they wanted to reject these textbooks, on the very next day, Governor Newsom issued a $1.5 million fine to the district, as well as announcing a contract to get textbooks to the district that meet state standards in time for the first day of school. Now, one of the things that is going on in our culture, and it's not the topic, but it's the way we talk about things, the way politicians talk. The two lowest ways of trying to make your point, the lowest way is to vilify somebody, call them names. The second lowest is to create a straw man of the other side of what the other person believes, even though we all know that's not the case. And politicians are really good at doing this, and our governor, I believe, has a PhD in this. Here's what he said. I quote, "The three political activists on the school board in Temecula have yet again proven they are more interested in breaking the law than doing their jobs of educating students." This is something a seventh grader would say. So the state will do their job for them. How noble. Continue to quote, "California will ensure students in Temecula begin the school year with access to materials reviewed by parents and recommended by teachers across the district. After we deliver the textbooks into the hands of students and their parents, the state will deliver the bill, along with $1.5 million fine to the school board for its decisions to willfully violate the law, subvert the will of parents, and force children to use an out-of-print textbook from, oh my gosh, 17 years ago." If we, continuing to quote our governor, "if we do not provide curriculum, this is what the president of Temecula School Board said. If we do not provide curriculum, I want everybody to hear this, we will literally be sued." Newsom replied. He declared victory, noting that the matter was brought forward by extremists who wanted to whitewash history. I knew this was going to be hard. "Fortunately, new students will receive the basic materials needed to learn," said the governor. "But this vote by the Temecula School District lays bare the true motives of those who oppose this curriculum. This has never been about parental rights. This is about extremist desire to control information and sensitive materials used to teach our children. Demagogues who whitewash history, censor books, and perpetuate prejudice never succeed." And then he finished here. "Hate doesn't help in our classroom, doesn't belong in our classroom, and because of the board's majority antics, Temecula has a civil rights investigation to answer for." Close quote. Now, thankfully, we live in a country where we get to vote. We get to have a say in this stuff. Let's pray together. Father, I guess I really shouldn't be surprised. Human nature. Human nature. of which we all have, can become so corrupt, so deceitful, so disingenuous, and so blind. Well, we have a chance to go to the polls. Thankfully, we live in a country where we can do that this fall. And would you give us wisdom as we do that? Help us to understand the times as the men of Issachar did in the Old Testament. To understand the times and know what ought to be done. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.